Do folks have questions for Dean?
Stand up and speak loud.
Okay. So thanks, that was really great. I just have a couple of questions. You mentioned this idea that the message in context of relationship is important. So I'm interpreting that like if I get it from somebody that I care about, I might pay more attention.
Mm-hmm.
And then can you tell me a little bit about how that might link to this problem of place being important? So does that mean that if I get it in one place or I send it in one place or I send it in a different place, that same person might respond differently because they're in a different place? I'm not sure I'm following that.
Right. Yeah. Sorry if that wasn't entirely clear. So I think place matters in a lot of ways, right? We know that really characteristics of the place that you're in are going to matter for how the message is received, right? If my attention isn't with this, or if I'm now in a school setting as opposed to at home, that could really affect how I receive and respond to a message related to sexual health. But what's interesting with this is actually we've done work demonstrating that it's just the relational properties of the place. The fact that I've exchanged messages with this service or called into this service in this place as opposed to an otherwise similar different place that is important for the relationship. So if that set of exchange of messages or calls continues in that same place as opposed to taking place in a different place, you're likely to get more self-disclosure, which is sometimes important in the context of collecting data about people's risks, or it also can be something to consider that can be dangerous in the context of people over-disclosing as well, possibly to peers. But when I talk about the relationship, it's not just relationships with real people, but also relationships with services and these personas that can be manifest through the text messaging service.
Mainly, I see this sort of technology used as an influence device. And I often wonder, is there any of this research that goes toward using it as a teaching device for creating peer education in parts of the community that don't have access to the kinds of information that some of us would do in places like San
Yeah, so the question was about using this for education and not just for influence. I guess for me, coming from actually the perspective of mainly studying persuasion and influence, I always sort of, this sounds really terrible, I always sort of map education as a kind of attitude change, which I think it is, but different techniques are appropriate for the kind of relationship that's in play. And so I think that one of the differences there is that there's a two-step process involved, right? That you're recruiting people who are going to be kind of leaders and educators in some way and maybe involved in this process if you're recruiting potential activists and educators for peer education. I think that's one of the key differences is what's the behavior change you're trying to bring about. In that case, the behavior change is that you actually want someone to become an activist and an educator. And so that's a very different kind of outcome and commitment than trying to get someone to do something for themselves and perhaps only once, that you're just trying to, at least for now, just get them to get tested once, and that's a pretty good start, as opposed to getting someone to make an ongoing commitment to do some peer education. So I think the lens I would look at it through is looking at the different structure of the behavior change goal, which is this a recurring thing? What kind of commitment is required? What are the type of appeals around the contribution that this person is making, right? Are self-interested appeals appropriate, or should we be making appeals that are more oriented towards the good that they're going to bring about in the community?
The slide you had about a promise and then absence of a message. If you're absence of a message, what is positive?
Right.
If you have a small organization or a small service and you're holding out a promise, whether it be via a website or a cell phone, and it's not totally automated, somebody doesn't get a response or develop a service. In that absence of that message, actually, be negative?
Yeah, I think definitely so. I guess part of what's highlighted there is that in the context of that relationship, it's assumed that the absence of that message means something. And if it doesn't mean that, actually, if it doesn't reliably indicate that gas prices are not changing in that example I was using, or it doesn't reliably indicate that my test results are not ready yet, or or that there isn't information back on this topic or something like that, but there really is, then that's kind of a breakdown of that promise that I think just has a huge ripple effect for that any message from then on is really going to be suffering from that broken promise. Yeah. Right, but I think the amazing thing is that you can make really well-defined promises in that way, that if you can follow through on them, then you're in a way constantly in communication with the end user, because even when nothing's happening, there's communication going on.
One more question? In the black?
Yeah. What about the speed of the communication? If somebody text messages me, let's say with a question, am I expected to answer it right back? Wait a day? What's the time thing between?
Yeah, for interpersonal communication. Yeah, I think there's been some work on how much that can vary a lot depending on the relationship and the nature of the query. That's not exactly my area of expertise, but where I have looked at it is in communication with a service, where the service may be backed by a person and the end user believes that, but it's not so much interpersonal communication in the same way. And in that context, we have varied the length of response, but always much shorter than a day. And in the amount that we varied it hasn't really had a substantial impact. One of the things that it can do is, in the context of some mixed human and computer systems, it can give the impression that your response is being formulated just for this one person, right? This is actually kind of a classic idea from the Turing test, which is the test between distinguishing humans and computers, is that the computer has to fake the processing time that humans would normally undergo in order to make its response seem more sincere, right? Because one of the biggest markers of sincerity is audience size. The smaller the apparent audience size, the greater the apparent sincerity. And so sometimes if you have some kind of a system that's powered partially by your human staff, but also through a set of maybe pre-written responses, actually some delay in the response can help to communicate this small audience size and sincerity of the message.